So this is what it's about, money, right? So you want to get money, and it's usually a quite scary experience, not only for beginners but also for every PI, and this is one of the things which makes life as a scientist sometimes really hard, because you have to keep doing this for your whole life as a scientist. But we'll try to make it as easy as possible so that you can surf along and get your money. So this is basically the outline. I'll talk a bit about the basics, the proposal itself, the process, and then at the end in particular about fellowships, because I presume most of you will be looking at fellowships. So if you look up what the definition of a grant is, a research grant is a sum of money or financial support provided to a worker or researcher for performing innovative or novel work. And the emphasis is on innovative and novel. Nobody will give you money for something what already has been done. So you need this element of novelty. Just before we start, I want to address a few myths and facts around grants. So one is, especially if you apply for EU grants, that you often hear this is a completely political affair and you need to have all sorts of strange conspiracies and supports and secret memberships. It's not true. It's actually a very fair and transparent process. I've been on many review panels, and the review panels are scientists. They make the recommendations, they make the ranking, and usually the funding agencies adhere to this. So you need to write a good proposal. That's it. A widespread myth is that in a grant proposal you need to say what the reviewers want to hear. Again, I would not worry about this, because you rarely are lucky enough to guess who the reviewers are. And also it's not about trying to please the reviewers by anticipating what they want. It's just about writing the best proposal you can. If you are too much worrying about what the reviewers will say and who they are, it's just a lack of confidence. Concentrate rather on writing a good proposal than trying to second guess who will review it. Another aspect is often that people think, well, a proposal needs to be fairly cheap, because if you make it too expensive, it will affect your chances. Again, this is not true. Most of grants and fellowships have a cap for how much money you can apply, but it's not important whether you come in cheap or expensive. It's important that the proposal is good. If you have a bad proposal, it will drop out regardless whether it's cheap or not. If you have a good proposal which is expensive and the reviewers think it's too expensive, they simply will recommend cutting the budget, but they will not usually throw out the proposal. So the end of it is actually the proposal is purely a scientific affair. So this is what you should concentrate on. But that's also with a grain of salt, because in the end, and this is particularly true for fellowships, a proposal is a sales pitch. So you have to sell your science and you have to sell yourself. And like with any sales pitch, you just need to watch the perfume commercials before Christmas on TV. It needs to convey some passion, ambition, vision, and credibility. And all of these elements, if you manage to mix these elements in the right amounts, then you have a successful proposal. And again, what you are selling is really, in particular for fellowships, yourself as the first item, your vision, your ideas, and also your track record and preliminary results. But for fellowships, it's mainly yourself and your vision which you are selling. So this needs to come across in a grant proposal, and these things is actually, they may seem easy and obvious, but it actually requires some hard work to get to this and to carve all that out. Just if you think a moment about it, why should an agency give you money? So, and that already, if you think about the grant in that way, has some important corollaries, because there's no point in trying to excuse your weak points or dwelling on your weak points. Don't be apologetic. So you need to convey your strong points. The reviewers will find your weak points, don't worry about that. But you should concentrate on your strong points. So what have you achieved? In what way you're distinguishing yourself from your competitors? What puts you in a position that you actually can achieve the proposed goals? And why should the agency trust your skills? Do you have a track record? Do you have publications which are relevant, or any other assets? And the most important thing for an agency, in particular for young investigators applications, is selling a vision. because they want to invest money in people who will become achievers. So the best way to judge achievement or potential to achievement is judging a vision. And this is often underestimated. You know, often you think, well, I have to sell my experiments and my science, and that's true. But above all, you need to sell a vision. And it's actually not easy to selling a vision, because that means, first of all, you have to have a vision. In order to find a vision, you need to do some soul searching. I mean, some people have a vision, but in most cases I find it's actually, you have to do some hard thinking to tease it out. So a few questions which may help is, so if you think about what do you find really exciting about what you do? Or what are the big questions in the field? You know, and even if these questions are way beyond your means, just think about them. You know, there's usually something useful coming out of that process. So Albert Einstein said, I have no special talent, I'm just curious. And I think this is a good guidance. Don't be shy, just be curious. Also, a way to think about is, if you had any resources in the world, what would you really like to do? And for which ideas you actually would spend a weekend in the lab. So these are sort of things, you know, which may help you to find out what is really the essence of what you like to do. And then, of course, you need a reality check. You know, you need to, after you've done the blue sky thinking, brainstorming, and dreaming, you need to get down to it and say, okay, does this hold up? Is this a really interesting question? Does this change the field, or will it answer a very important question in the field, or open a new view? And also a good check is whether you actually can say your vision in one sentence. If you need more than one or maybe two sentences, it's usually too complicated. People will not get it if something is very complicated. It needs to be very clear, and I will keep pounding on this idea of being clear, because this is a very important ingredient of a successful proposal. Also, some small warning: a lot of people, in particular in the beginning, like to or tend to look for a niche. Don't do this, because a niche is usually a place where nobody is interested in. So you may find a niche, but nobody will care. It's really more important than you know, to concentrate on something what you can do well, rather than trying to look for something what nobody is interested in. Another point, what you sell is your preliminary results. And as a rule of thumb, if you write a grant, 20 or 30% of what you put in there should already be done. And that's a lot. And this is often difficult for young investigators to have that amount of preliminary work and data to put in. But for sort of project grants, this is fairly typical, that you have 20–30% already done. And in particular, if there is you know, no long track record, you need to make up for it by preliminary results. So for instance, if you go into a new field, or if you change fields, it becomes more important. And it's all about building the trust that the agency or the funders or the reviewers think you actually can do that. And it's a good idea to sort of not just mention the preliminary results once, but keep referring to them as you write your proposal, you know, in different places. So it's purely psychology. The reviewer will read this, and there is, oh, figure A, figure B, preliminary result. You know, it builds up a good feeling in the reviewer. Send them in an appealing way. If you look at this figure, for instance, it's very difficult to understand. It's cluttered, lots of panes, lots of labels. A much clearer thing is like if you use a scheme, you know, which explains what you've done, and a very small figure which shows the essence. And again, this is presentation, but it is important because you need to make it as easy, digestible as possible for the reviewer. Presentation, and I'll come to this at the end of the talk, is an important element. I mean, a well-presented grant with crap science won't win, but very often nowadays it's so competitive that everything is marginal. So everything what you can add to bring you success is important, and a good presentation is simply important. So what makes now a good grant proposal? And there's actually some rules which are almost timeless. So if you look at this chair, this was designed in the 1930s. Still looks very modern. And this is what I'm trying to say in the next few slides. There is some elements which are almost timeless, and these are the important ones to get right. And the most important things is to be clear. A good grant proposal has to have a clear concept, a very clear line of thought, and a very clear purpose. And also it needs to have a wow factor, but also on the other hand, you need to comfort the reviewers that it's achievable. And as I said, it also needs an appealing design. So I'm going to run through these elements in more detail. If you think why concept and clarity is so important, think about where the reviewer typically reads your proposal. And I've been reviewing many things, and I've done all that. You read the proposal on the way to the review panel, on a plane, in an airport, under time pressure, on the weekend. So none of these things is permissive for the reviewer really focusing, concentrating. So you need to make the reviewer's reading as easy and pleasant as possible. So you really need to write the proposal in a way that an overworked, sleepless reviewer still can understand it. And this is why clarity is so extremely important. How do you achieve clarity? So let's start with the concept. What works best is to put a single idea or a single hypothesis in a grant. It's a typical beginner's mistake that you come up with 3, 4, 5 questions and you think, oh, the more questions I ask, the better. No, try to ask 1, maybe 2 questions, but not more. And another typical mistake is to get lost in sidelines. You include too many things, you have this and that and here and there. It's just confusing. It simply will cause the reviewers to question everything. Reviewers' job is to criticize and to question. So it is important to have one idea and you really hammer that out. And this is what is solid, and the reviewers will ask few questions. If you open half-baked concepts here and there, this is just food for the reviewers to pick on. Also, nowadays, most funding agencies actually have become quite risk-averse. So they don't, even though they may, all of them pretty much say they want to have, this wow factor and blue sky proposals. My experience is that at the moment they are quite risk-averse and they are more looking for proposals which are exciting but have a very minimal risk. And that means you really need to focus on the concept. And again, this is more important for fellowship applications. And again, this is not easy because it's really easy to make things bigger, complex, and complicated. It's much harder to make it simple. So you need to really distill out the big question in your proposal. And again, you need to find this question. And usually, the smaller it becomes, the simpler, the better it is. Also, what is important, you have to explain the concept. You have to explain your idea. Don't think that the reviewers, because they're from the field, automatically will buy in and know what you mean. Even if the reviewer knows exactly what you mean, they still want to hear you explaining it, because this gives them assurance that you actually have understood it and you actually know why you're asking this question. And also, this is actually a very good way, if you do this smartly, where you can lead the reviewer where you want them, right? Because you can set the scene and you take the reviewer by the hand and lead them through the proposal. And again, this is a huge psychological advantage because the reviewer likes it. It's easy. Of course you like this. So this is just an example for a clear overall concept. This is from an EU grant application. And it just says we have one central hypothesis. And we will test predictions which emerge from this hypothesis. And the predictions are exactly 3 things. Not more. And this is a 12 million grant. So you don't need a lot of questions to get a lot of money. It's the opposite. It needs to be clear and simple. Again, there's different ways how you find this out, right? I mean, it's all very easy to say, have a clear concept and so forth. But how do you actually go about this? A good way is to discuss this with your peers and with your mentors and with as many people as possible, because you will very quickly find out whether what you're thinking or what your question is easy to understand, whether it resonates with the people whom are telling that question, and whether they go, ah, great, or whether they go, what did you say? You know, and once they go, ah, that's it, you know, then you know you're on the right way. And what some people find quite helpful are mind maps, where, I don't know whether you've heard this concept, you basically start brainstorming and you doodle something, and then you have branches which are ramifications of the idea, and then in the end you sort of have a map where you have different branches, but it's a good means of sort of ordering your thoughts, because you can then look at it and say, okay, this is good, if I combine that, you know, I get my question. But whatever means you're using, it needs work, and you need to be aware that a good, solid, simple concept is lots more work than a complicated concept, and you need to invest that work. Whatever your personal style is, but you need to do that in investment. You need to find it. There's unfortunately very few people who, you know, are naturally born with the gift of having a very simple, snappy idea. And it's also important because it will help you enormously in writing the grant. So if you have a simple idea, a simple concept, you can start with this big question. So this would be your hypothesis here at the root of the bonsai. And from then on, you develop the branches. So everything what you're putting in as experimental suggestions emerges from this hypothesis. And again, this makes it easy to follow. You can refer back to your central question, and it's clear at all times where you are. You know, the reviewer can start reading the proposal. After 5 minutes, the train has arrived, and he has to get out and has to get on a bus, and can pick it up in the bus, and you know exactly, you know, what it is about. You don't need to go back 5 pages and figure out, oh, where did I stop? And so this is also why it's important for yourself and makes writing actually a lot faster if you invest time in figuring out your idea. A good way to structure this is actually working with questions. So instead of like having subtitles, your subtitles simply can be questions. So for instance, instead of saying the role of protein interactions is unknown and we will investigate it here, you simply can say, what is the role of protein interactions? You know, it is a more immediate way to sort of challenge your brain, and also a more immediate way to engage the reviewers. This is concept and how you sort of think about it to put it down on the paper. Another thing what is very important is that it needs to be clear what you want to achieve with the grant. And again, this is not self-evident. It may be self-evident for you, but it, in most cases, is not exactly clear, and you will see this often and often in commentaries or in reviews, that the reviewer goes, yes, this is an interesting question, but it's unclear what this will achieve. So you need to say this. And so you need to say what you are creating as outcome. And the outcome may be simply new knowledge, new application, new methods, whatever, but you need to say it. So instead of like having all the pieces there, the reviewer wants to see what's coming out of it. Another important thing is that you need a wow factor. You know, something what the best proposals are where you as a reviewer you think, why didn't I think of this? You know, why I sit there and go, wow, this is really good. Why didn't I have this idea? And again, this is something what usually needs work. It is about, well, could be just a cool idea or an unexpected observation which you had or a new method which you had developed. Whatever it is, it needs something which is really exciting. So it can be quite bold, but it still needs to be realistic. Or it can be quite bold, but if you see that the whole thing is realistic, you simply can concentrate on a subtopic. You know, you may not, if you say, well, I want to change the world, you know, and say, well, this is not feasible, but I can change this. I can, you know, make new solar panels which will save more energy. When you look at this in a sort of diagram, what you're dealing with is you need to optimize feasibility versus impact. So if you have a proposal which is utterly feasible but has no impact, it's dead boring. If you have a proposal which has high impact but no feasibility, it also won't work because it likely will become a suicide mission. So what you're looking for is something, you know, what is in between, which has both elements. And again, it may look very simple, but it's a good idea if you write a proposal to have this in mind, you know, to look at it and say, well, how far I'm out there, and am I in the middle, or am I getting really very boring, or am I getting too risky? And again, there is, for instance, nothing wrong if you're risky, but at least then I would put it in that this is a risk, you know, because it shows the reviewers that you're actually aware and understand what you're doing, and you're not just, you know, running into the abyss with closed eyes. So this brings me to comforting the reviewer. This is the making sure that your plan of research is realistic. And again, the main mistake is to include too many sideline projects, because it may seem a good idea, but on the other hand, a lot of sideline projects usually just dilute the main effort, and they also distract your resources because you need time and money to do it. If it does not directly feed into answering your big questions, it's simply a waste of time. So this is how the reviewers will view sideline projects. So you can write, if you write the draft, they may be in, but then go through it and prune whatever you can. Throw everything out what is not related to your primary objective. It's much better to concentrate on the core, on this one or two questions, but instead of being superficial about many things, really hammer it home. So really tackle it from several different aspects. Make sure that you basically provide an answer which is rock solid. What is also important is that throughout keep mentioning your skills which can contribute to that rock solid result. So for instance, if you have, let's say you're using advanced microscopy or some optical methods, and you've done this before, right? Keep putting in sentences, yeah, I have experience in this, in my previous work I did this, and so forth. Again, this simply builds the confidence in the reviewer that you're actually competent and can do it. This is in particular important if you are using new technologies which are not well established. I mean, everybody will believe that you can clone a plasmid or can run a PCR, but if you use, for instance, methods which are not so well established, it's important to refer to it that you actually can do it. This was sort of a bit of the science part. Research projects have become almost managerial enterprises nowadays, and in particular bigger projects like EU projects have a lot of management components, but this is increasingly being demanded also from fellowship applications, that you actually can show you can manage a project. And in many grant application forms you will find explicit sections where you have to put in how you manage the project. But even if this is not the case, it's always a good idea to sort of supply it on your own. What helps is a Gantt chart. This is simply where you have your different aims broken down in timelines. And this all may sound very stupid and bureaucratic, but it doesn't mean that you actually have to stick to the Gantt chart in a slavish fashion. It's more about showing the reviewer that you have thought about how the project develops over time and what steps you need to take in what order. Nobody will hold you if you're a few months, up or down. it's more, the important thing about this is, about the Gantt chart or project planning, is that you know how the work will develop and how it will be structured and what depends on what. So don't be scared that, you know, people will point your finger and say you are, you know, 3 weeks late. It's usually, nobody does this, but it's just a good way also for yourself to actually, if we go back to feasibility, the Gantt chart will very quickly show you whether you actually can do all that what you want to do. Also mention any project management or supervisory experience you have. So for instance, if you have supervised summer students or so and you apply for a student, it's a good idea to mention that you have supervised students. And you also want to include a justification of resources. I come to this a little bit later. And also a description of everything what you need for your project. So for instance, technologies, facilities, and how you can get access to them. Because if you say, I'm going to do a lot of proteomics, and you never say where you do it and how and where the instruments come from, you know, reviewers may be doubtful, well, can you actually do this? I mean, it looks fine, but do you have the machines? So this is sort of more general part. I'm now going to run through like how a proposal really looks like. Is there any questions at this point? No?
I have one
yep.
question. Regarding the side projects that you were mentioning that we need to be careful with, I have always doubts on that, because I think it would also rely on the timeline, on the allocation of time that the grant. I suppose, you know, if we apply for a 5-year grant, the central idea may be one, but then again, if it's only one objective, wouldn't that be too short?
Yeah, with side projects, I don't mean, so another way, everything what feeds into the main idea is fine, and if you come from different angles, you know, that's perfectly fine. With side projects, I mean projects which are not really related to the main theme. You know, something which you could do, but which doesn't really help the main case. This is typically what is getting criticized, because typically these side projects are shallow. You know, they tend to be superficial, they are not really worked out in great depth, and they are not really well resourced. And this is where you basically go to the reviewer and say, please shoot me. You know, because this will be criticized very heavily. So everything that feeds towards the main idea is fine, and if you have a 5-year proposal, right, you need a substantial amount of work. But don't get lost in, you know, too many peripheral things. Concentrate on what is really necessary to do that. And rather than, you know, looking horizontally, scratching here and there, just try to really get into the depth of the problem. That's what I mean with sideline projects.